Ever since I was a little kid, I had a fascination with the continent of Africa. I had never anticipated that I would actually encounter slavery firsthand. It was still legal and viable in this country. That's one of the values I find in travel is you not only learn about other places, other people's outlooks, but gives you a sharper view of your own culture and your own history. One nomad one time when I was driving through the desert in my pickup truck telling me proudly that his wife was bigger than my pickup truck. He said it sincerely. The highest ideal you shoot for in life is how much you can gain for yourself. That's a very limiting versus, how much can I experience and give back to the people that have had tougher circumstances dealt to them than I have. Where one of our members went over the edge of the riverbank, fell off their four-wheeler, and then the four-wheeler ran over them, and we're out in the middle of the wilderness. And I remember thinking, what shape is she in? But this could be the end of, all of our goodwill and adventures.
Hey there, adventure seekers. I'm Kenny, host of the Novel World Travels podcast, where I'll explore the transformative power of experience. Dive deep with me as I chat with extraordinary people, uncovering the lessons hidden in their journeys, the good, the bad, and the life-changing. Live vicariously, embrace new perspectives, and grow along with me on the Novel World Travels podcast. Hey everybody, today I'm excited to introduce my friend Bill, a world citizen who has dedicated his life to service. He has been running the nonprofit Unlimited Possibilities for 15 years. Unlimited Possibilities focuses on lifting people from poverty and ignorance through education and shared experiences, addressing social issues like economic hardship, disease, hunger, and illiteracy, both locally and internationally. Bill has worked with multiple organizations on several trips to places like Nicaragua, Vietnam, Tanzania, Nepal, Ecuador, Puerto Rico, and more. His work includes anti-racism and social justice initiatives, as well as environmental causes. He previously ran an alternative school providing students with transformative outdoor experiences like hiking glaciers in Alaska, biking through the UK, and whitewater rafting. One of Bill's most profound experiences was with the Peace Corps in Mauritania, where he witnessed the harsh reality of slavery and unique cultural customs. Let's be present and listen in as Bill shares his incredible journey of service, adventure, and life-changing impact of travel. Welcome to the podcast, Bill.
Glad to be here.
All right. So let's get started. So you've had a busy, eventful life. But what was it like growing up with your family in New Hampshire before your life of service began?
Well, it's interesting. I probably up to my late teens, even into my early 20s, I lived a pretty provincial life. Didn't do much traveling at all outside of New England. Maybe as far as upstate New York was about as far from New Hampshire as I ventured. And then my first real experience with extensive travel was when I did join the Peace Corps, and there happened to be a airline strike at the time. So we trained in New Mexico, which is in the opposite corner of the country from where I am in New England, and had to take a train because there was an airline strike, and that was my first-hand look at some of the geography of the U.S. And then from there, it exploded into a lot of international travel over the years. Plus, a lot of travel in the U.S.
Walk me through your.
No, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I didn't want to interrupt you. I thought you were done. I was just going to say, walk me through your decision to join the Peace Corps.
Well, I had an interest in it from when I first heard about it. I was around when it got started. People credit John Kennedy with starting the Peace Corps. It was actually Senator Hubert Humphrey's idea, I believe, and it was championed by John's brother, Robert. And so they made it official in 1961. And I had heard about it. My older brother had a friend that was in the very first group that went to Colombia, country of Colombia in South America. And I just liked the sound of it, going to try to help people, naively thinking that because I was from the U.S., we could give our wisdom to any country in the world, and it would be helpful. And that was kind of an eye opener when I actually had the experience. But so early on, I kind of wanted to be a part of it. I remember talking with my brother's friend who had completed his tour in Colombia, and I said, "You've known me my whole life. Do you think I'd make a good Peace Corps volunteer?" And I remember he looked at me and he said, "Yeah, I think you're crazy enough." And that was his only response. That I was crazy enough to try it. So that started it all.
Gotcha. So you were initially when you were going to do your service mission with Peace Corps, you were initially offered India, if I'm not mistaken, right? But you chose to
Exactly.
go
Yeah.
to Africa.
You know, it's interesting. Ever since I was a little kid, I had a fascination with the continent of Africa, and I don't know where it came from, but when I got invited to a program to train for a program in India, I just inquired, "Is there anything in Africa coming up?" And they said, "There's just one program. It's going to be the first group to go into this country called Mauritania in the Sahara Desert in northern Africa." And they said, "Can't make any guarantees, but if you're willing to wait, 2 or 3 months, you might get selected for that." So I took the chance, and sure enough, I got invited to that. It was a small group of just 20. Uh, it was a real kind of frontier experience. We were going to be the first group to go in. Didn't know how we'd be treated, so they invited only males. They thought women might be mistreated in the country. They had no real idea until they sent the first kind of test group in, and I became a part of that group. So I had this long-standing interest in Africa, and the dream came true.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. So I'm imagining Mauritania was somewhat of a culture shock from someone who came from a town in New Hampshire, which is not the most diverse place, I understand.
Yeah, I think New Hampshire is the third whitest state in the U.S. So you're right. The diversity, certain terms of people of color, was pretty minimal. Uh,
Hmm.
and you're absolutely right. It was my first experience with. I've heard the analogy of a fish doesn't know what's in water until you take it out, and there was such a contrast. The culture that I stepped into. It was not only an eye opener in seeing a new culture, but it gave me a whole different perspective on my own upbringing and my own culture. And that's one of the values I find in travel is you not only learn about it widens your experience and your knowledge of other places, other people's outlooks, but gives you a sharper view of your own culture and your own history that you might not have if you just stayed in it all the time.
Speaking of that, you just sparked a question in my head, and maybe you can give me your perspective. So, traveling, you do get a different perspective of the world than you might do from listening to the radio, watching TV, reading magazines. How so? I'm sure you watched TV growing up there in Manchester, New Hampshire, and you might have seen news programs telling you what this place or that place is a lot. What is it about being in a location that gives you that understanding and insight to what a place is like?
Yeah, it's interesting. It to me, it is decidedly different. And I can remember one of the first trips I did was to East Africa in connection with this Unlimited Possibilities group. And we had this great experience with a woman who was from Kenya that helped us set it all up. And I had occasion to have a conversation with her at a conference once in front of a group talking about that very issue. And she said, it's inexplainable. You have to experience firsthand travel to know the effect. I think it has something to do with just it's tactile, it's emotional. You're fully immersed. When you learn things vicariously, you can learn them intellectually, but I think in terms of the heart, you learn them through your actual experience and your face-to-face interaction with people. In addition, what was really markedly different for me, I went from here. It was a culture where I thought my worldview was everybody's worldview. Whatever you brought up in, whatever neighborhood, whatever family structure, until you're exposed to other things, you kind of think that that's what the world is. And yet, I stepped into a culture where the physical standard of beauty was obesity, as opposed to our culture, which we went very much to the other side of you know people being thin and conditioned, and actually uh, women being held to a standard that was totally unrealistic for them because being thin was the kind of cultural ideal in the U.S. at the time that I went to this country and found out that the norm was obesity. And then I had never anticipated that slavery, I would actually encounter slavery firsthand. It was still legal and viable in this country. And I would be out in the middle of the desert with what was an Arab culture that had slaves that they had brought from the further south in Africa. And to witness that going on right in front of me, these people, all the people doing the work were enslaved, and the people that were, in sort of that, in the owner capacity, kind of sitting around with all these other people doing the work. It was, and then just the physical differences. The people that were sitting around, the women were obese, the men were kind of frail and fragile looking, and the people that were enslaved doing all the work were like these specimens of beauty according to our culture. So it was like mind blowing to witness that. It was 180 degrees from what I had thought would be the norm for the world.
So for our listeners, and I'm curious myself, why, what went behind that their norm of appreciating obesity in a woman, or obesity in general? Because that's somewhat hard for us to understand nowadays. But there's a different time, different culture. I mean, help me understand that.
Yeah, I was curious about it myself, and what I discovered was it was a very sort of male oriented, even though women had a huge influence on in the actual day-to-day life. Men were it was a kind of a male dominated society, and to have a woman who weighed an excessive amount meant that you had to be a good provider. And so that was partly tied into it. It was a point of pride. The more that your wife weighed, the more capacity to provide for your family you had to have. I actually had one nomad one time when I was driving through the desert in my pickup truck tell me proudly that his wife was bigger than my pickup truck. Yeah.
Oh
and
wow,
and he said
wow.
it sincerely, and it was amazing contrast. Yeah.
So, being there, you witnessing actual slavery, did that provide any insight to the legacy of African Americans?
Yeah, in the sense that I remember kind of thinking about and studying that a little bit, and it seems that the pattern that it goes in terms of power differential, that there's like three stages, as I understand it. People that are on the lower end of the ladder in terms of how they're treated, in terms of the power they have, in terms of the oppression that they suffer. They will do that thinking it's the norm until they're awakened to the reality that this is not uh, the way things should be. And generally, then there's a period of turmoil and strife, and they get to a higher ground later. So, for example, what happened in Mauritania was the people that we worked with are nomads that traveled through the desert with their enslaved group and their herds of camels and goats. And they were required, when they became an independent country, they were required to send their kids to school. And the nomads didn't want to do that. So to meet the quota, they sent the sons and daughters of the enslaved people that they had to meet their quota. And what happened is the enslaved started to get educated. They ended up being the merchants in the shops, getting an education and heightening their awareness about the injustice in the country. And sure enough, about 5 years after we left, there was a civil war to overcome and fight back against the slavery conditions. But when I was there, it was just kind of accepted as that's the norm of life. And these people tended to accept their lot in life because they didn't see the possibility or hope to change things.
How interesting. So, I mean, the listeners just heard, but I mean, it's just you have a nomadic tribe. They don't want to send their kids to get educated. They send the kids of the enslaved. The enslaved kids become educated, and it leads to an uprising of sorts, of a civil war. And to your knowledge, is slavery still a thing in Mauritania today?
Well, it came and went. It was finally outlawed, my understanding, for the last official time in 1981, if you can believe that. we all like to think of slavery as a thing of the past, but it's not. And even the remnants, I mean, as you well know, that in the U.S. today, that the unstated oppression that's still unrecognized or people stay unaccountable for it, but it's still a big issue in our country in terms of people having equal chances as we pride ourselves on. I think the U.S. has always been better aspirationally about what we should be about than actually living it out. There's been injustices towards, I think, people of all colors for since our founding, I think, and it continues today. It's better, sure. I mean, we don't have the horrific conditions that we had in times of formal enslavement, but we still have some pretty unfair playing fields that people are operating on.
I'd really like to know about the alternative school you worked with children. What was that about?
Well, this was back in the 70s when, at the time, there was a movement to prevent dropouts, kids dropping out of school before they graduated. And in our town, we had a group of students that just weren't performing and were, delinquent. Most of them didn't have any real strong run-ins with the law, but they were heading that way. And so we got a grant to start an alternative school for the youth at risk in our town. And I'm happy to say that it's still going 50 or 60 years later. But when we started it, basically we were given some money and support, and the kids in the schools, they just didn't know what to do with because they were always causing problems, skipping school, being truant, that kind of thing. And they said, "Here, you've got this group. Do whatever you can with them." And that really started me down the road towards experiential learning versus traditional academic learning. And we did a lot of outdoor programs with these kids that led to my own interest in experiencing more adventure kinds of activities in the outdoors.
What were some of the biggest challenges to organizing and leading an outdoor trip for these kids? How old were they? And yeah, what were some challenges to planning this, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, they were the normal high school age, most of them. A few of them were maybe a grade or two behind because they were never been very successful in school. I remember one of our favorite students who was with us for like 5 years. He graduated high school at the age of 21 years old, and he attended his graduation proudly, which we admired him for. He was several years older than the next oldest kid. But yeah, I think it was. I mean, the challenge is the earlier you can work with kids, better you can help straighten ones that are starting down the wrong path. We had them in high school, so uh, the way we set it up, I think that the key thing that we did that was of significance is we made it an option to come to our school. It was not. We didn't want it to be seen as a dumping ground, as a place that was the last resort, and kids were thrust there and felt like they weren't worth much or valued much. So we actually, every kid that we took had to earn their place in the school by getting involved and you know making some effort to turn things around academically and to get involved in the school projects and that kind of thing. So I think that was the key to our success. We actually did become a state model program over like 3 years. And I think largely because of that, we always gave kids options to opt into, because I don't think you can coerce anybody into doing anything. It'll work for a while, but ultimately you're going to pay the price unless people are investing to further their own growth.
What's the name of the program?
It was called, originally it was called the Rochester Alternative School in Rochester, New Hampshire, but then we had a very conservative benefactor who did volunteer work at the school, and we knew it was an extremely conservative town, that it's kind of surprising that an alternative school could last for like 3 years, let alone 50 more years. But what happened was instead of trying to just preach to the choir, we brought in this guy who was very conservative, and he got totally enamored with the kids and the program, and he became a champion to get it embedded in the town as a permanent school, and so we renamed it after him, and it's now called the Bud Carlson Alternative School for about the last 40 plus years.
Great, great. And so walk us through what some of the things, some of the places you've gone, and some of the things you had the kids involved with.
Yeah, well, the because of the economics and the limitations, most of the things we did with the kids were local, either in New Hampshire or New England. There was a sister alternative school in Massachusetts that we used to do exchange outdoor programs. They would come up in the winter and do some cross country skiing and winter camping with us and our kids. And they were building fishing dories. They were on the coast in Massachusetts, so we would go down in the spring and fall and do trips with them in the dories that they had built on the ocean, and stay in one of the islands just offshore. And what it triggered in us was we wanted to get more education. We wanted to stay ahead of the kids in terms of our skills in the outdoors. So we got some training with Outward Bound and several other groups, and traveled around not only locally but even out west to doing some rock climbing and training in outdoor pursuits. And it became so, even after that was no longer necessary, that became so meaningful to us that a group of friends and myself continued on doing this for like 20 years. We did 20 consecutive trips, adventure trips in the outdoors. And that's when we traveled to places like Alaska and climbing on glaciers there, and biking through the UK, rowing a dory around Cape Breton, doing the whole length of the Allagash in canoes. Just the whole. At one time, we actually rented a 40-foot sailboat that you can actually do without much experience. We had one guy who'd been a navigator in the Navy, and his claim to fame was that he'd gotten a submarine lost in the Pacific, and that was that was the most experience we had in terms of marine experience. But we survived that, and it was probably one of the annually we would look forward to spending anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks together, pursuing some new adventure, but also having a chance to kind of talk about our lives and focus on our own development through the experience.
Can you describe the success story of a student who was profoundly affected by these trips and how it influenced their future?
Sure. One kid that comes to mind immediately, obviously not a kid anymore, but there was one young student that came to the school, and he was very negative. He was very, very bright, but had a very kind of already had this sort of jaded, cynical view of life. And it was just a downer to have him walk through the door every day. We knew we were going to have to try to counter his negative energy. But then we concocted this idea of we had a young girl who was also not acting out, but very depressed. And she came in after one weekend. She was there for about a year and a half. And after one weekend, she came in, and her whole attitude was more positive than it had been. And we kind of inquired as to what had happened. And she said over the weekend, she had gone on a walkathon to earn money for a local cause. And she felt really good about that. And it occurred to us that, well, for kids with lower self-esteem, if they do something for someone else, maybe it's going to be helpful to them. So that's what gave us the idea to start a community service program and combine it with the outdoor pursuits. And we did what we called a skiathon, where the kids would prepare for months, and then they would go up into the wilderness in northern New Hampshire and do a 20-mile skiing trip, cross-country skiing trip through the mountains in the wilderness, and raise money that they would then decide which causes that they would donate to. And this all kind of unfolded over a period of a year or two, where we just increased the focus on the community service. And we found out that these kids, it was a hallmark for them. You could see that so this one kid that had come that was so negative, he said he wanted to go on that particular year's skiathon. And we said, well, you've done nothing to earn that. If you can show us that you're invested in you can come up with X number of sponsors and kind of change your attitude around over the next month, then we'll consider taking you in the crew. So he did that. His attitude shifted. I remember he had a court date with for some of his transgressions, and the local judge who knew about us, and he was kind of in favor of what we were doing, and he was kind of this crusty old guy. This kid went in front of him, and the judge said, "Look, John, you've got like 6 or 7 charges against you here that are all minor, but collectively, I could be sending you to the youth development center, the sort of detention center for youth. And I'll tell you, if I see you in this court again within 2 or 3, within the next few months, I will send you to the youth development center." And he said, "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" And the kid said, "Yeah, would you sponsor me on the skiathon, Judge?" And the judge said, see me in my chambers." So he took him and he sponsored him for the amount that he needed to be able to go on the skiathon. And following that, this kid became 180-degree turn. He was one of the advocates for the school. He went on later to work, I think, for Outward Bound himself, one of the outdoor adventure famous groups that lead confidence building trips. And so that was one example of the experiential impact, bringing out the best in a kid when he was heading in the wrong direction when he came through the door.
Wow, that is amazing. I mean, service will do that to you. Mataki Awase, we're all family, and we're built to take
Exactly.
care of each other.
Exactly.
So, and sometimes we don't know that, we don't realize that until it happens. And
Yep.
when you do something for someone else, it just stretches your heart out, and it makes you understand, fully what it means to be human, not just to take care of yourself, but each other. And I just love it. I love it.
Exactly.
I love hearing that. And that's,
exactly.
yeah, what a great program.
Yeah.
Speaking of service, what motivated you to start Unlimited Possibilities?
Well, it's interesting.
And how has that mission, sorry, and I just want to ask,
Yep.
how has that mission evolved over the past 15 years?
Yep. So originally, there was probably about a 20-year hiatus from when I came back from the Peace Corps that, lives, pretty much a normal life. Went back to school a couple times and kept getting, more degrees, and worked in education, worked in this alternative school. And then I had a godson who was severely disabled, and we got this crazy idea. We did a lot of work with ropes courses, adventure ropes courses that are pretty common. A lot of schools have employed that as a means of confidence building, oftentimes in connection with their physical education program. So we had built a ropes course that we used with our kids too. And we decided this boy is severely disabled, so we decided to run a marathon. And he is wheelchair bound, so his father pushed him in a wheelchair, and we raised enough money to research and build an adaptive course or a universal course, so people in wheelchairs, people with disabilities, could participate in this ropes course adventure. And that felt so good doing that we said, why don't we just expand this a little bit and see if we can start to do a series of service projects, get some donations from people, from friends. And from that meager beginning, I think that was 1986, I think we've done close to 300 service projects now over the years, and some very short duration, some as long as, a week or 2 weeks. What was the one we did out in with the teepee raises? Were like 5-6 days, right? And so that's what kind of generated it. And another thing that kind of got us started was, at the time, I remember United Way and some of the common ways of giving back and trying to do something for the community. There was a scandal where the the head of United Way was found to be making like $6 million a year. And there was this, it kind of exploded into the news. And supposedly the defense of that was that he had friends in the NFL, and that he gave United Way this great exposure and they brought in more money. But some of us, it just didn't sit right that, that something is supposed to be set up to help other people. The head of it is making this huge amount of money. And so we said, why don't we, instead of going that more common way of giving back, why don't we start our own little group where the money we raise, we know will go directly to the people that we want to help, and that we can get involved ourselves face to face instead of just giving money to a cause and never have an experience that will change our lives too. So that's what started the whole process. And I reckon it kind of to the philosophy of our country is this whole notion of rugged individualism that we were founded on. And it's easy to lose sight of the fact that we are a community. And uh, I'm responsible for myself, but I'm also responsible to help others when I can, and to build a whole community. So that's kind of been the theme that we've worked, that has fueled our group for the original group was 20 years, and then another 15 with unlimited possibilities. And we pride ourselves that nobody gets paid. It's almost an act of keeping the best side of you alive. That once you start taking money, and you can use the excuse that, oh well, I'm getting paid, but I'm doing good. Where do you draw the line between, are you doing good for others? Are you just doing things for yourself and having an excuse to say you're doing good things? So that's kind of how we've operated. And I think that one of the things that rankles me, I think a theme that's been going through our country for years, is this notion of like socialism is a bad word. It's like a taboo because we're founded on this rugged individualism theme. And yet, to me, socialism is just thinking about others. And we all have a responsibility to do that. And the more we're gifted with, the more we're blessed with, the more responsibility we have to try to help people that have drawn a worse lot in life, and had more injustice to deal with.
So as far as this organization is concerned, unlimited possibilities, with the trips and the things that you've done, how did the needs and the cultures of places you visited differ across your service trips?
Well, they've differed widely. I mean, in terms of, we've been in Nicaragua, sort of a Latin American culture, been in East Africa, been in Asia, in Nepal and Vietnam. But the one commonality, and it's funny, everybody who's been on trips with us, one commonality we've found is that in all of these places that we've been, the sense of community is higher than the average sense of community that I've experienced here in the U.S. Uh, and and I'm not the only one who's remarked. Almost everybody that has gone on a trip, that's the thing they've been most moved by the, first of all, the sense of welcoming and warmth that they get, and then secondly, the sense that how these people who have nothing will really pull for one another and offer you, even if they have nothing, they'll offer you what the little that they do have. So it's a great life
And
lesson.
it is, and it's something to reflect on because, everyone around the world, including Americans, sometimes pride themselves on this being the richest place in the world. And, what are we're rich maybe in resources, but what compared to these communities, what are we not rich in? What are we lacking in? What do we have opportunity to build?
Yeah, and I think oftentimes what we're lacking in is a sense of purpose. That I think if the highest ideal you shoot for in life is how much you can gain for yourself or your immediate family or whatever, that's a very limiting versus, how much can I experience and give back to the people uh, that have had tougher circumstances dealt to them than I have.
And why
And
is that? Because when we were, when mankind or humankind was, at earlier stages, we needed each other to survive. There was no
right.
monetary system. There was no, it wasn't always that one person collected all resources. We needed each other. There's some people, whether it be, people who are disabled, elderly, uh, or infants, needed someone to support them. Some people were better at different skills than others, but as a community, you all supported each other.
Hmm.
And it's only in relatively recent humanity that that's not the case, for
Hmm.
many different reasons. And we've lost that, and that's why there's so many people in need, because we've forgotten that sense of obligation to each other, at least from my point of view.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think philosophically, I've come across people that A will think of humanity as basically good, and others that see as that we're basically bad and we have to overcome the bad tendencies. My own view is that we're kind of neutral, that we have the capacity to do great good and also to be very selfish and greedy. I love that. In fact, we just finished a program on a Native American, the Hopi Navajo reservation. And my understanding, there's an old Native American sort of fable that says that all of us have two wolves within us. One that is negative, it's avaricious, it's greedy, it's trying to get everything it can for itself. And the other one is the kind of benevolent wolf that is kind to others and those around them, thinks more than of itself. And supposedly an elder tribal member is telling this to the grandson that you have these two wolves within you, and they're always in a fight to who's gonna win. And the young member says to the tribal elder, "Well, in the end, who does win?" And the grandfather says, "The one you feed." And I think that
Mm.
when we've got to the point in society now where people can be very selfish and self-centered and go down that road and pride themselves on having more than other people or taking more, accumulating more toys, whatever. But I think it's ultimately kind of an empty pursuit versus seeing what you can do to give back and live as good a life. You don't have to be a martyr, but living a balanced life where you're giving and taking. That's where the real purpose is.
So before I move on, I have one more question regarding unlimited possibilities. But based on everything you were talking about and the opportunities humanity has, do you have hope?
That's Yeah, I do, and it's funny. I've been for the last 5 years, I've been asking this question of people I come across, that especially those that I'm kind of intrigued with, and I feel a sense of respect for what they're doing. Um, on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being you couldn't be more pessimistic, 10 being you couldn't be more optimistic. Where do you fall? What number do you give it, and why? And when I first answered the question myself, I remember I was at a 50th reunion of the Peace Corps with 10 other people that had been in the Peace Corps with me. And one guy that I really particularly high respect for, he was one of my favorite people. I asked him what he would give it, and he said at the time, he said about a 2. And I said, yeah, I'm like at a 2 or 3 too. But since then, as I've talked with people and I've met people like you and people that are playing to the better angels, I it just inched up to a 5. So, so I'm 3 points higher than I was 2 or 3 years ago, just because I've been impressed with the things that maybe are not getting the visibility that the negative stuff gets, but the good things that people are doing, and then the attitude and philosophy that people have. Uh, that we can make a better world. So I guess I'd say
Interesting.
I'm a 5 on the scale now, because I see the dangers of the climate, the issues that are going on. I see that this coming election, I think, we're teetering on the ending of democracy or strengthening of it, depending on which way it goes. This is a tumultuous time, I think, in our history. But there is hope. Yeah, there definitely is hope.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I mean, I think if you are working towards good, I don't care what your number is, you have some hope, or else you wouldn't be doing it. So I
Exactly.
think
Yeah.
there's some degree of hope with a lot of us, and I'd say you didn't ask me, but I'll say that mine's pretty high. I'll say that.
What would you?
I
I'm curious.
recognize some of the,
I'm curious. What would it be?
you know, okay, so I'm going to give you my answer and I'm going to give you my explanation. So I will say a 10. And the reason why I say a 10
A 10.
is
Wow.
because a, a 10. And the reason why I say that is, we get, we get, we have this cover over our eyes as humans, and that cover is time. Time is the most important thing in the world. And our time in this life is short. And so we see things on that scale. And, some of the worst things can happen here on the planet in between now and our dream of us all seeing things as a community, as a family. And, the things that we do, we might not see the end result of. And even if some bad things happen, whether it be the environment, whether God forbid democracy is lost here in America. But I mean, all these horrible things is not the end. It's not the end, and I do everything in my power to support, what I believe is good. But, 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, when the present is in their lifetime and I'm long gone and forgotten about, I believe the best will happen. I believe we're destined for that. I have full confidence. Again, in this lifetime, there's a lot to spark fear and anxiety, but I have to recall. I have to remember that my short time on this earth is not the end. So am I? So if we're to be specific, am I am I optimistic that this will be the best possible worlds by the time I'm 45 now, by the time I'm 85, 95? Probably not. But, we're working for future generations, and we're doing all that we can, the little bit at a time, and that's all you can do. So I have full confidence. I mean, because what else would I put my effort towards this for?
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah.
Why am I doing this work? Why
Yeah.
am I working with great people like you? So yeah, so
So
that's my philosophy anyway.
so so you've inspired me. You've just pushed me to a 5.5, Kenny. Nice work. but but
Okay.
I'm but I want to I
Good.
want to I want to share a couple of reactions to what you just said. As you were talking, I was thinking of
Sure.
Martin Luther King's notion of the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. That's the long view
Right.
that you're
Right.
talking. I also I will tell you that two stories. The average range that I've been getting, and I've been doing this for about 4 years now, and I can't tell you how many people I've asked this question, um, has been 7 to 8. And there's been, as I've teased out the reasons why, there's been four themes. One is that people say that they either have to be or they're naturally optimistic. Like you just said, if you didn't have hope in your heart, how could you how could you get up to face the day? The second one is that sort of the crises that have been coming to a head in our country over the last decade or so are healthy in the sense that it's bringing surface things that we have to look at and not keep them below the surface and pretend things are better than they are. A third is that there have been crises before that we've come through. The Holocaust, the civil rights. You go through history. Oftentimes, there's a lot of pain and bloodshed, but that we've come out on the better side. And then last is the hope in the youth. Right now, people have a lot of hope in the values and the way that the younger people are looking to the future. But when you said 10, I probably had 4 people total that have given it a 10. And one was, this is remarkable, One was a woman in Africa. One of the consistent services we do is we go to a little village in Tanzania, Africa, and we tutor kids that are too poor to go to school, and they can study on their own and work their way through getting a degree by studying on their own and taking an exam once a year. If they pass, they progress through school. And one young woman who was orphaned when she was a young girl, both of her parents died of AIDS. And then she went to live with a grandmother, and then her grandmother died. And then she went to live with an uncle, and he got sick. So she was basically orphaned about 3 times, but she never quit school. And she found this program and that we've been supporting. And she now is just a few courses from becoming a full-blown lawyer. And I asked her that, thinking that she's had such a more difficult journey than most people. I asked her what her number would be, and she said a 10 also. And she said, because many days I end up at the end, way down the ladder, but the next day I wake up and it's a 10 again. So she just has that belief that give it your best every day. So anyway, I was pleased to hear your answer. I should be interviewing you, not the other way around, Kenny.
Yeah. I was curious about one other thing. This is sort of a shift, but you worked with your family doing some of these service trips. How has working with family influenced your experiences, and what impact has it had on your relationship and your work with Unlimited Possibilities?
Well, it's interesting. I started a group in 1986 with a small group of friends, and that continued for like 20 years. And then some of us that had founded it said, this is time to turn this over to a younger group. They have their ambitions, what they'd like to do with it. So we did that, and we went off and we started this Unlimited Possibilities. And one of my sisters was one of the founding members. So there were just 5 of us that started it. And so one thing that's been helpful is it's, and then my younger sister has also gotten involved. So there's 3 of us that go to Africa every year, for example. And then one of my sisters and myself have done almost all of the service trips that we've done over these 15 years. And it's been helpful in terms of getting perspective, bouncing ideas off each other in terms of the workload. It's really hard to start something if you don't have allies that are committed to it also. And that's what's been helpful, is this core group of people that are not just talking a good game, but are actually putting it into action. And I think I don't think I would have done near as many service trips if I'd had been the only one to have to design and organize and try to champion each one. So it's been helpful, especially helpful that way. It's funny, when I came back from the Peace Corps, this is a little bit of an aside, but people ask me what was the difference that I found. I met some pretty remarkable people that were doing this, given that putting in 2 years to go overseas and live in a different environment and make no money and do this voluntarily. And people said, what was different about it? And as I reflected, the difference was these people stepped over the line. We all have these aspirations, these dreams of what we can do. And then there's a smaller group of people like yourself, you'd have to be included in it, that take the step to step over that line. And I really don't even know what the line is about. It's the part that holds us back, that wants to keep us in our comfort zone, that makes, stretching out geographically and other ways to just go out and meet the world and expand your view. There's a hesitancy to do that in most of us. And what I realized, that the only difference that I could see universally with all these people was that they did step over that line. They took that risk. I did a study of courage for my dissertation, for my research, and I wanted to know what the characteristics of courageous people are. And that's what I found was that the people that are willing to put their values into action for the good of others and for themselves too.
Wow.
I wish I knew what that key ingredient was that gets people actually to not back off when they get up to the line and they have a chance to really step into something that will stretch them.
Interesting. Yeah, that's something really interesting to reflect on. I should have asked this earlier, but I'm really curious about, you've been to so many locations around the world. How do you approach a new location that you visit in terms of understanding and respecting local customs and traditions? Because they're all different.
Yeah, it's interesting. That would be my advice in terms of travel in general. Is uh, all of the trips that we've done, we've had boots on the ground, somebody local or somebody that has lived in that culture for a while. I know there are some people that their traveling style is just to go out and let the universe provide what it does and step into the opportunities as they happen. And then other people will overprogram. They're going to know exactly what they're going to do every minute of the time. I'm kind of in the middle. I like to structure it so that if we're going to go and do a service or we're going to spend some time in a different culture, I want to maximize that time. And the best way to do it, I found, is to connect with somebody who is there, who has probably similar ideals, but can help you get a sense of what is needed versus our going and imposing something that may not even be needed by the people. Uh, so that whole notion of having somebody local that you can trust and you can work in collaboration with to design the trip. So, for example, the TP Raises, Dave and Mackenzie were the people that had the experience. And had I tried to do this, or unlimited possibilities, try to do this without connecting with them, we'd have been spinning our wheels a lot more and not accomplish near as much as we did by collaborating and aligning with somebody who's local. So that's my strong advice.
Gotcha.
If you're gonna travel elsewhere, uh, get the advice and the support of somebody who is in that milieu and kind of knows what's important for you to see and experience.
For sure. Makes perfect sense. Can you recount a particularly challenging or dangerous moment during any of your service trips, and how did you overcome it, if so?
Yeah, it comes down to people again. We went to we've been going, as I mentioned, to East Africa, to Tanzania for maybe 10 to 15 times now, and we connected with a woman who wanted to start a little side travel experience where she had these off-road four-wheelers, and she would organize trips to go out into the wilderness of Tanzania to where the last hunter-gatherer tribe, one of the last hunter-gatherer tribes in the world. I mean, literally, there's 125, I think, or 126 different tribes in Tanzania, and one of them is
The
called the Hadza.
Maasai?
No, the Messiah are the ones that are pretty well known. They're the herders and the elegant tall people that
Okay,
are a very iconic tribe that most people know about.
sure.
This is the Hadzabi tribe, and these people are not as well
Okay,
known, but they actually, with bow and arrow, they actually hunt their food every day. They shoot birds out of the sky, and so they're just hunter gatherers, just like they were maybe thousands of years ago. And I've had the good fortune of going out on a couple of medical clinics and meeting and experiencing a little time with them. And so we decided as a group that we would build that into one of the trips. And it was one of the first or second trips. And they didn't do it very well. They led us onto this riverbank where one of our members went over the edge of the riverbank, fell off their four-wheeler, and then the four-wheeler ran over them, and we're out in the middle of the wilderness. And happily, this woman has done many trips so that she suffered a concussion. Happily, another vehicle that was on safari happened to come by. We were able to put her in that vehicle and get her to a hospital. she not only recovered, but she's been on like 2 or 3 trips with us since. And that could easily have been the end of unlimited possibilities if she'd been one of those people that she could have, sued us. I mean, we're just a group of people that get together. We're thought of as an organization, but it's just an excuse for a group of people to get together and try to do some good together. And so that was I was in the vehicle behind her when she went over the edge, and I remember thinking, this not only is this, what shape is she in, but this could be the end of all of our goodwill and adventures. And it just kind of miraculously turned out that she recovered. She had a concussion that took her like 3 to 6 months to recover from, but she is committed as the rest of us to doing some good, and she's back at it with us now. So that was probably the scariest moment that we've had.
Wow. That's pretty wild. So so we're coming somewhat towards the end. I have a few more questions.
Sure.
But we touched on this earlier. But how should we view serving others as a citizen of the world?
Well, it's interesting. You use that term when you first introducing me, and I remember my shifting from seeing myself as a citizen of America, which I am, but seeing more of myself as a world citizen only after doing many, many of these trips and seeing the commonalities that humans have and the responsibility to help one another that we have. And that's what I do think of myself now, as more of a world citizen than a U.S. citizen. And I think where that comes from is my background is psychology. I've got like 3 or 4 different degrees in psychology over the years. And for a long time, psychology focused on what was wrong with people, abnormal psychology. How do we fix people that have different psychological conditions, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, on and on and on. And traditionally, up until about 30 or 40 years ago, psychology tended to look at what was wrong and try to fix it. And more recently, the shift has been, how do we live the most fulfilled lives that we can? How do we maximize our time here? Not just how do we minimize pain, but how do we maximize fulfillment, well-being, impact on others? And the most important factor that they've identified, and I would accept this group of psychologists that are in the field of positive psychology to kind of explore what we're capable of and how do we get there. They've decided, and they've, through research and study, that a sense of purpose is the most important thing that we should all look towards, and that the sense of purpose is defined as aligning yourself with some cause that is bigger than yourself. Now, whether that could be your family, that could be your neighbor, your neighborhood, that could be your country, that could be the world, but it's putting energy into something bigger than just your own interests, your own path through the world. And that's what I think is what fuels, people doing for others or service kind of trips, is this notion of fulfilling the sense of purpose. That in some small way, hopefully what you do will shift the world to a little better place. And like you said, maybe the trees we plant, we won't stand under the shade of, but somebody else will down the line,
Right. Yep, that's the way it works. And in your travels, the places you've been, the lessons you've learned, give us all one example of something you picked up from another country, another culture, another community, and you apply to your daily life.
Okay, the example I'll use is in my study of courage. I came across a woman who had lived in Holland during the time of the Holocaust in World War II. And she, in Amsterdam one day, when the Nazis had taken over, the Germans had taken over the country, she was studying social work, and she was on her way to classes, and she stopped in the main square and she saw a Nazi truck had stopped, and they were grabbing Jewish children and throwing them into the truck. And she stood there appalled because they were going to take them off to concentration camps. And she said she froze. She couldn't get herself to do anything, say anything. She just witnessing this horrific event. And she saw two young people came up and confronted the two Nazi guards, and they threw them in the truck, and they drove off. And at that moment in time, she said she resolved to do whatever she could to do her part. From then on, she was credited with rescuing 150 people from the Holocaust. Her picture now hangs in the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. And I used to talk about her when I was asked to talk about the research I had done on courage. And I finally had the chance to meet her in person in Washington, D.C. And I had to ask, she was in her 80s at the time. One of the most humorous and humble people I've ever met. It was just magical to spend the hour that I get to spend with her. And I asked her at one point, what would she pass on about courage? And I think when it comes down to it, that's what we're talking about here is how do you get yourself to step into what you know is right to move forward and to stretch your world and live the most fulfilled life you can. And I said, what would you pass on to courage, about courage to anybody else? And she said simply, do what you know you should do. And I talked to her for a little bit longer, and I asked her again, I said, could you elaborate on that a little? I said, I loved what you said. And she said, just do what you know you should do. And I asked her a third time. I was trying to get her to elaborate and give me all this more information about how could you live a courageous life like this, live your life to the fullest as you obviously have done. And the third time she said, Bill, I've told you 3 times, do what you know you should do. And that's kind of a mantra. That and another favorite phrase of mine is, the worst mistake that a human can make is to do nothing because they can't do enough. So those are the two things that, even when I think I'm most discouraged about the prospects of whether anything we're doing is making any difference, I come back to that you got to give it your best shot and hope for the best.
Well, for sure. It's, it really is that simple though, isn't it? I mean, do what you know is the right thing to do, and everything else follows after. Many means of maybe doing that, but and might have to figure out the best way to go about doing it, but head towards that direction. You see injustice, head that way. If you see something, a need, head that way. And yeah, it's that simple. So yeah, that was simple words, but words of wisdom.
Yeah.
So,
and if you see something that's good for you, head that way.
Yeah,
it's a pretty simple formula, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's the essence of what it means to be here and be human and to serve others. So, so I'm coming up on the second to last question. So I want you to think. Okay, this is second last question. So, what is one strange, unusual, or out of the ordinary experience you've encountered or participating in during any of your worldly travels, service or not?
One strange. Well, there's a ton of them that would come to mind, but the first one that for some reason that popped into my mind is when I joined the Peace Corps and to go to Mauritania, they gave us 2 snake bite kits because they said there were vipers out in the desert that, and if you get bitten by one, take this, use this kit. And then they gave us another one that was green in color. And they said, this is for the green mamba. And if you get bitten by the green mamba, you got about 5 to 15 minutes to live. So this kit, keep it with you and take it immediately if you get bitten by a green mamba. I never saw a green mamba. None of in our group ever did. But about 3 years ago, when I was in Tanzania tutoring. We live in this little volunteer house that's very close to the library where we do our work. And I was walking down the path after a day's tutoring by myself, and I saw the tail of a green mamba slither across in front of me. And I remember thinking,
Wow.
yeah, it was like 50 years after I'd been given one of those kits. And, but I realized by that time, once again, experience, how it changes you. It enables you to do things that might have been horrifically frightening. I wasn't particularly scared because I knew by that time from people that had encountered them that the snakes aren't trying to get you, they're trying to get away from you. And that's what this one was trying to do too. And it was only a few feet from the doorway of the house I was staying in. But
Wow.
after it passed, we went through the rest of the week and I never gave it another thought. So I guess, it sort of is a lesson in the more you stretch yourself, the more you stretch your comfort zone so that there's more things you can handle than you thought you could.
Sure. So when you were taught about this green mamba and given that kit, I guess at that time you were pretty terrified. Like, oh man, these snakes, I hope I don't see one.
Yeah.
You were scared then, and then,
it,
a bit more confident.
right, exactly. Yeah. I never actually expected to see one,
Yeah.
but I did. And it was
Yeah.
it was just a tail, but it was quite a bit bigger than I anticipated too.
Yeah. I might have to change my pants or something after I saw one of those. I haven't had that experience, but yeah. So anyway, we've talked about a lot. Great conversation. I have one last question. This is from you to our listeners, and basically, what advice would you give to someone considering doing some sort of service, like with Unlimited Possibilities, Peace Corps, or any other service work? What advice would you give someone considering that?
I'd say consider your options. What kind of time you have to devote, how long it would be. Go for the path with the heart. Do something that you're really connected to, that you feel a passion for. And then the strongest advice is when you think of all the reasons not to do it, push through those and do it, because it
Cool.
seems when I did the courage study, one woman described courage as unfolding in 3 steps. The first is you're fully aware of the anxiety, the difficulty, the fear, the thing that's going to stop you from doing the thing you should do. And they said, when you step through that, it's just like swimming. Once you break through that, you're just focusing on what you're doing. And then the third stage is you feel really good about what you did. So 2 out of 3 stages ain't bad, right?
Right.
So just
Yeah, great words of wisdom.
Push through it would be my advice.
Push through it. I love it. Yeah, I mean that's pure growth there. Push through it. Anytime you have a fear or apprehension or anxiety, I mean you don't really grow without some sort of your word that you're fascinated with is courage. You have to be courageous to kind of push forward. So I love it, man. But thank you, man. I appreciate you coming on and talking, man. I love you. This is a better world because you're in it and the things that you're doing. And I'd love to see a person who's dedicated their lives and has an understanding that this is one community and one life. We forget because we have 7-8 billion people on this planet that we're still one. No matter where you are, that's your family. And we tend to forget that. And you're a man who remembers it, and I appreciate it. I really appreciate being able to share you with the world. And again, thanks for coming on.
Thanks. And who knows, Kenny, maybe you and I'll get to push through something together in the future again, huh?
For sure. I hope so, man. I hope so. We'll keep in touch and we'll make it happen.
Okay.
So, all right, brother.
Thank you, Kenny.
Thanks for joining me on the Novel World Travels podcast. Subscribe on your favorite platform, leave a review, and share it with your friends. Join me on my community on Facebook. That's / Novel World Travels, and Instagram, Novel World Travels. And join me on my webpage, which is novelworldtravels.earth. And remember, life is outside. And if you can't get there, join me and my friends on the Novel World Travels podcast. I love you all.